Welcome to Hemp Forward as we discuss the hemp industry, what could be the next great farm frontier. In these sessions, we'll not only discuss information about growing hemp, but we'll take on the challenging questions. What are the hurdles that farmers in the industry must overcome in order to make the industry a success? We'll talk to farmers and those in the industry, and we'll go to operations both large and small. So let's get started with session number 1 as we talk about the transition to growing hemp. Welcome to Hemp Forward. In this session, fertile ground, helping farmers make the transition to growing hemp. If you're thinking about growing hemp, you probably have a lot of questions, and rightfully so. How difficult will it be to make that transition? Is my experience in growing other row crops transferred to growing hemp? What could I expect for a return on investment? And what might I need in the future as far as equipment? How big should I start? Well, all of those are questions my next two guests are going to help me with. Casey Brooks is the Vice President of Farming Operations at High Grade Hemp Seed, and then Jim Hunt is with Netafim, and both of them have years of experience in hemp and working with farmers who are making that transition. So guys, let's just start out with this. You know, a lot of farmers are considering making this transition. So what do they need to perhaps first think about if they want to devote a few acres to growing hemp? Casey, what should I first think about?
Well, if you're looking to get involved in the hemp industry, I would start with a reputable seed company. Make sure you're getting the right genetics. This isn't something you cannot go down to your ag store and purchase the seed. It's usually outfits that you're getting it. If you're going to be doing cannabinoid farming for resinous oils like CBD, CBG, you're going to want to look for a feminized seed. The male plants aren't going to be producing that resinous oil. That oil that we're looking for is what in return can you monetize and make profit with. So I think it's very, very advantageous to start with a reputable seed company and kind of go from there.
Jim, your thoughts?
I think in general, the big picture is that most farming operations are always trying new things. Every year they do something a little different. So I think they should adopt the same approach that they've found effective on other things that they've changed on their operation and try to take that approach going in. Start small. Depending on what their experience is, there may be a lot of new things to them. If they've never irrigated before, they're probably going to want to irrigate a hemp crop, not just for the irrigation side, but also for the fertility management side. Another big change that they have to think about and plan for and learn from others' experience is weed management. There's no chemistries available basically for the crop, and so it's going to be all mechanical upfront processes, and those are really, really critical when you look at maximizing yield, return on investment, and that sort of thing.
I think a lot of folks that are looking to do this probably have some experience perhaps in growing some row crops. So let's say they've done corn or soybeans. This doesn't look like corn or soybeans. So is there anything that transfers over, or is everything totally new, do you think?
No, I think the equipment definitely translates over. You know, whatever you're set up with traditional farming of corn, you can use those same type of implements. Your ground prep's going to be the same. As we were mentioning, you know, the water's the key. You do want to get this plant some water for sure.
Jim, you mentioned the water earlier. Do you think that the hemp, if I have corn and beans, the hemp needs more than even those crops, do you think?
Well, it's certainly a different requirement, and in general, probably a lower water requirement. But from the studies that we've been a part of so far, we think timing is really critical, and most areas where we grow corn and soybeans, there's a drought period every year that's somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks. And I think as we continue to learn more about hemp through professional studies that are being done, we'll understand how critical management through those dry periods might actually be for both the quality of the product and the overall biomass production.
Walk me through field prep, and then as far as thinking about just how I'm going to put this crop in the ground, what do I need to be thinking about? Even fertility, those types of things. Obviously we think about those in other row crops, important in hemp as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about fertility, I mean, you're going to want a good amount of nitrogen. That's something where you can always start testing your water, testing your soil, get with your local university and figure out what's already in your soil, how's your water look, and then from there you can kind of see what kind of NPKs you're going to be adding along the way.
Casey, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about picking the right seed. You started with that. Is that something that, like we think about picking different hybrids for corn and soybeans based on where I live, is that what I'm going to do with these seeds as well?
Yeah, and what I meant by that is essentially we're not looking, you know, industrial hemp farming, if we're going for tri-crop, it's fine to have males in there. You're going for seed, bast, herd. Where in this field that we're in right now, this is an all female field, feminized field. Again, we're looking for the resinous buds that are going to produce the oil, and that's what we're going to extract.
Jim, you've been around a lot of farmers that make the transition, and you mentioned about not taking more than you can chew, so to speak. So is there a right way for me to figure out how much I want to try whenever I'm going to begin this?
Well, I know this. I had a young producer that is also happens to be a Netafim drip dealer, and he decided about this time last year that he was going to start with 200 acres. And at the end of the day, he pared it back to 10. And I'm sure if we had him on camera today, he would say that was the smartest decision he made as far as his introduction to learning to farm hemp. There's different practices for weed control, as I mentioned, because of a lack of chemistries, and that can be overwhelming on large acreage. Across most of the major agricultural areas in the U.S., labor is an issue, it remains an issue, and long-term it will continue to be an issue. And if you need to have 20 people suddenly to get out into a field with hose, they may not be available.
Well, you've mentioned weed control. Is that the weed control? Is manual? Is that the only way to do it?
Well, so in the field we're standing, there's plastic mulch down, so that is the main reason to put the mulch down, is to help inhibit weed growth directly in the row. I've seen farms where they mowed the weeds in between up to a point. You can get in with traditional cultivation equipment, but at some point the crop gets tall enough that you're going to be damaging it too much to do much of that.
Casey, you've obviously been out in these fields a lot, and you've tried different practices. What are you finding for weed control?
No, yeah, Jim hit the nail on the head. You know, this plastic mulch, it helps a lot. It keeps the beds a little warmer, that root zone warm. It's keeping the weeds at bay. You can use traditional tillage equipment to get in there and get your weeds down, but as he mentioned, you know, there's not much we can do for spraying on this, so it is a lot of hands-on for sure. You're wanting to take the time to get out there, and if you do need to get out there and hoe early on, is what we're trying to do is get this crop shooting up and above, so we're beating out the native weeds.
So both of you have been around this for a while, and you've seen other farmers try this. So other than maybe starting too big and needing to pare back, what are the other things that I'm not thinking of that I should be thinking of?
One thing you want to do along the way, once you got the crop in the ground, once it starts to get into this flower state that we're standing in right here, you're going to want to be testing along the way, making sure that you're staying compliant to your state and federal levels. So it's something you're going to be wanting to test. We do on the farm a couple times a week up until our harvest time, just to make sure we're staying compliant.
Well, and Jim, I want to go to you in a second, but I do want to ask about that because that content's important. So we don't have to get into the super details, but how do you do that to manage so that you make sure that your crop is still going to be compliant?
Yeah, sure. So we have testing facilities in-house where we're using it, but again, you can outsource that nationwide. Pretty much every state has it. You can work with your local universities to test on it, but since 2014 Farm Bill, there's been quite a few labs that have popped up nationwide.
Jim, I want to go then to you. What mistakes are you seeing farmers make, or making the learning curve, shall we say, to growing hemp?
Well, I think probably the biggest one is because there's such a lack of knowledge on what is really a best management practice. There's been, I know for sure, last year in western Colorado, there was a lot of over-irrigation at certain periods. The reason I know that is because studies that we've been a part of suggested that we actually increased biomass production with 4 different irrigation treatments. The lowest irrigation treatment increased the CBD content, and the overall biomass production was actually higher. So I think that's probably the biggest, but there's not a great place to go yet with a deep enough database of knowledge on what is the right amount of irrigation, what is the right amount of nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium, and so on.
It sounds like it's a great thing to try, but there's still lots to learn. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we're just getting our toe wet. You know, we're getting ready to do that big cannonball into the lake, but it's so new. We're learning a lot. It's outfits like with Jim that we're collecting all this data that we can push it forward.
But I'm guessing both of you must see a lot of promise in this. I mean, this is a new industry, but it's yet a promising industry. Isn't that right, Jim?
Oh, definitely. I live in West Texas, and I see eventually at some point hemp for fiber might be a replant crop for cotton farmers who get held out late in the season. The genetics probably aren't quite there yet, but the industry is working on that, and I think that may be a really big opportunity for cotton production areas, for example.
So we've talked a little bit about weed control and tillage. Jim, what do you see as far as tillage, the farmers that you've worked with?
So instead of putting the plastic mulch down, because that's a labor and a process that has to be learned up front, and it also remains in the field at the end of the harvest, so you still have to do something with it. There fortunately are some biodegradable films, but I think we probably, from what I've seen, we're not quite there yet necessarily with those films either, that make everybody in the industry happy as far as what's left in the field, how easy it is to get out of the field, and that sort of thing. So another option to help in weed control, if you've already made the transition to no-till or more minimum tillage practices on your farming operation anyway, I think you should take a serious look at that. I know there are farms that are doing no-till, and that's a great way to increase soil health in general and to help manage the weeds.
So take me down the road a year or two. What transitions do you see hemp making, the hemp industry, Casey? How do you see this moving forward?
Yeah, you know, we're still kind of waiting on the FDA to kind of tell us what we can and can't do. We're waiting for some more regulations. Once we see that, I think it's going to really open up just from the cosmetics world to human consumption in food and beverages. At that point, you're going to see the Coca-Colas of the world get involved. It's around the corner. It's coming real soon.
Jim, something similar, or how do you see it evolving?
You know, I think just our knowledge of how to grow the crop better to maximize production on every acre, which means somebody new coming into the industry, it makes it easier for them to grow fewer acres and still have the profitability be appealing, because the reality is when you start with a new crop, it impacts the rest of your farm operation as well. Even if it's only 10 acres, it's 10 acres that would have otherwise been dedicated to 1,000 or 1,500.
Good discussion. Thank you both, Jim and Casey. Now we're going to go to Eric Sykes in California with Organics Alive as he talks about some of the transitions to growing hemp.
Hi, I'm Eric Sykes from Organics Alive. Through Organics Alive, we've had the opportunity to help many traditional farmers convert their land and plant hemp for the first time. So what kind of changes would a farmer need to make to their current operations in order to plant hemp? Well, a lot of that's dependent on the current infrastructure and geographical location of the farm. And so, you know, if the farm is already running on a flood irrigation, you can run flood, you can run pivot, you can do drip lines, you can even dry farm. You know, all of that, once again, would be dictated on your current farm's infrastructure and geographical location. So, you know, once you've kind of taken a look at that and maybe what some of your neighbors are doing, if they're producing hemp as well, you know, also ask yourself as the farmer, what interests me about the hemp industry? Am I more interested in food and stock for fiber production, or am I interested in growing CBD or boutique flower? You know, once again, a lot of that could be dictated on your geographical location and your current infrastructure. I would say somebody growing 1,000 acres of hay is more apt to grow seed for food production than somebody who's doing a you know, a small boutique and converting a field that was pastured and wanting to say, hey, I have about 10 acres over here that's not being used. Why don't we see if we can make it a more profitable 10 acres than just being pasture? And by planting hemp, you know, that's a great way to also remediate your land as well. So in the beginning, really the changes for planting hemp aren't too great. The real changes to a current operation are going to have to occur down the line when you go to harvest and process the hemp. You know, that's going to be the biggest change for the farmer. So, you know, that's where you want to, like I said, ask yourself, what excites me about the hemp industry as a farmer? Am I interested in growing food? Am I interested in growing grain? Or am I interested in growing seeds? Well, hemp being so versatile in how it can be grown and where it can be grown, that all depends on what you want to do with the material for post-harvest. Here we have our high-grade hemp Matterhorn CBG that we have hung inside of our greenhouse. And the greenhouse is blacked out and we have it temperature and humidity controlled, so we can get a very slow cure on these flowers so that we can trap as much of the terpenes and save as much as the cannabinoid structure as possible for the flowers. So really the, hemp being, like I said, is so versatile that you could direct seed into the field. You can use a greenhouse for propagation and then transplant your seedlings. You can have cuttings and mother plants and transplant those into the field. You can grow inside of a greenhouse for real particular robust, boutique flower. So really the changes aren't going to have to be so much to the front end other than needing to identify your genetics and the best planting time of year for hemp in your area. But really the real difference is going to come post-harvest when you're going to be processing your hemp, and all of that once again goes into your genetics and what you're growing for. So really not too many differences other than what you're actually going to do with the material in the end. Well, I'd have to say if you're already growing on your land, then you already have a great advantage. Knowing your land and your infrastructure, knowing your equipment, how you're going to be planting, and then knowing the fields and your local climate, what is going to be working best for you. So definitely all of your experience as a farmer working your fields is going to benefit you as you begin growing hemp. Being able to identify problems and fix them before they occur is huge. Having a labor force already in place for people to help manage in the fields, that's going to be very important as well. And perhaps having connections to distribution would also be a huge thing as well in your experience. And then of course knowing your neighbors and your surroundings. One thing that I feel like hemp farmers, this being such a new crop, can definitely benefit from speaking to each other, and what works on one farm may or may not work well on another, but definitely sharing everyone's knowledge and experience is and learning from that is going to help benefit us all in the end. Because once again, it kind of goes into that versatility. You have hemp, you can do everything by hand. You can hand plant, you can hand spray, you can hand fertilize, you can hand harvest, and you can hand trim and then hand pack hemp, or you can go 100% mechanized. You can have a machine planted, machine sprayed, combined, and totally mechanized processed hemp. So once again, looking at what you're growing hemp for, what your genetics are, what your geographical location is, what your current infrastructure is, being able to look at all of those items and mash that together, all that experience is going to really add big benefit to you as you go into planting hemp for a season. Well, I would have to say one of my biggest surprises was how resilient the plant is. We're growing out in a pretty harsh environment with a lot of sun, a lot of wind, very dry on a field for the first, being cultivated for the first time. So, we were able to learn a lot, and this plant really survived. Once again, having good genetics goes into a big part of that. Behind me is the cherry wine from high grade hemp, and having a lot of great phenos in here, beautiful field, and good genetics is going to help the farmer not run into too many surprises in the end. So yeah, definitely once again, having good genetics is going to save you a lot in the end. Well, I would have to say for irrigation that the more farmers who grow hemp and the more we're able to study its behavior in different regions, we'll have manufacturers develop products that are hemp specific, drip lines with hemp specific emitters, foliar sprays that are specifically for spraying on the flower, so I definitely believe that the product innovation is going to follow the farmers planting, because farmers are very innovative, and though when you have a problem, they definitely are the ones to solve it right on the farm. And so, you know, as far as nutrition, Organics Alive, we have been able to create a 100% soluble fertilizer line that can be injected or it can be foliar sprayed as well. And we've really nailed down the growth cycles of the cannabis plant. So we understand what vegetative means for the hemp plant. We understand what the transition phase is for the hemp plant, and also as we go into the flower and finish flowers. So we have designed a nutritional program that will fertilize from beginning to end, and you know, that the key is going to be clean fertilizers. You know, we don't want to be using for hemp products. Most of the time, they're going to be used in human production for a human to use in the end, and so we won't want to be feeding them harsh chemicals or anything like that. You want to stick to an organic.
Stay with us here on Hemp Forward. In our next session, we'll talk about marketing. What are the predictions and the problems and solutions in the hemp industry?